Don't leave your draft without Matt Waldman. Finish that sentence for me.
Courtland Sutton or Allen Robinson. One of the, and really, why not both? But I would say those should be two of your three receivers. And I might even add a third one a little bit later. But I would say those two guys. I mean, how do you, first of all, Courtland Sutton, how do you look at Jerry Jeudy and say he's Antonio Brown? I always thought that was kind of like a little too far-fetched. I understand the love for him, but he's more, at worst, he could be the Peter Warwick of this class. And I don't think it's going to go that bad. I think he's more of an aspiring Reggie Wayne. But that means that Courtland Sutton, who I've been kind of pounding the table about this, in my articles weekly, is that DK Metcalf's a better athlete, but being a better athlete doesn't make you a better wide receiver. It makes him better at certain things that you could compare them both to, like 3 to 4 things about contested catches, yards after the catch, straight line vertical routes. DK Metcalf has that beat if he has the better quarterback. But Courtland Sutton is more than good enough in all those things, and he's better at about 3 to 4 things as a route runner and more versatile than what Metcalf is. So I expect with Russell Wilson, now that he has they flip-flop quarterbacks most likely, that we're going to see Courtland Sutton have a career year.
Yeah. The Courtland Sutton thing, and Cecil, who has always given us the drop on all things Denver Broncos, has been saying this for months. As Sutton's ADP continues to rise. And now you have to take Sutton in the third round. But it seems obvious. There's going to be stuff that we learn, Matt, in the first couple of weeks that isn't obvious and maybe isn't even on anyone's radar right now. But this is not one of those things lying low in the weeds that's going to jump up at us. There's a lot of warnings here about this. Warning is a negative word, but there's a lot of harbingers. I guess that's a negative word too. Geez, why am I being so negative? This is a good thing for your fantasy teams. Russell Wilson's number one, and the whole Denver Broncos offense. I think we could probably make a list of offenses that we all have different players we want to be in those offenses, but mostly be in on those offenses. Denver's one of those offenses because it's going to get a lot better with Russell Wilson. Minnesota comes to mind, Philadelphia comes to mind, and so on. Let me drill down on Sutton really quick and see how far we want to go with this. Is it Courtland Sutton over A.J. Brown?
Yes.
Courtland Sutton over Michael Pittman?
Oh, absolutely. I would put A.J. Brown over Michael Pittman.
Right.
And honestly, I would take A.J. Brown first because I still think I can get Courtland Sutton in the third round. But I would say for sure that means that A.J. Brown in round 2, I'm looking at a running back.
Right. I think one of the first 3 rounds, one of the first 2 rounds, take a running back. But the third round, it's either a Kyle Pitts round. I should ask you about Kyle Pitts, or it's a wide receiver round. And there are a lot of, the beautiful thing about fantasy football, and Matt, I don't think this gets said enough, that there can be multiple right answers. When we argue about what the right answer is, they can both be right.
Yeah, go somewhere and stop talking about what you did with your team to the people that you're dealing with, and listen to what people did with their teams to win their leagues, and you'll find that there's it's the same thing. There's no two paths that are same in terms of how you get where you got, and that's the beauty of all this.
And I think that I would guess that based on just what we would project, that whether you take A.J. Brown or Michael Pittman or Courtland Sutton in the third round, you're probably going to be on the happier side of things. And I think that you probably will have to make a choice. I think Allen Robinson you can get in the fourth round. You brought up Allen Robinson. So let's circle around to Allen Robinson. And really what I want to ask you about this is, I don't say this enough to you on the air, Matt, but because I work with you, I get to look smarter. Like there's a lot of times, and I always give you credit. I want to try to create a culture in fantasy football here of giving people credit, because you were the first one You're the first one to say Matthew Stafford's getting an injection in his elbow in June. And nobody else was talking about that. Nobody else was talking about it through July. And then training camp opens and they say everything's fine. Oh, wait, maybe it's not quite fine. He's having to have a schedule to manage it. And even Matt, even when I hear them say, oh, his passes have all the pepper, I think Courtland Cooper Cup said that. Like, it's got all the pepper as usual. And I was there. I think Peter King was like, I was there, or somebody was there and said, I saw him throw 70 passes. And they all look like, oh, even those things make me feel like, well, why are you trying to reassure me so much about this? But at the same time, you did say Allen Robinson, because what I struggle with, so here's a thing that's happening now. Justin Jefferson ahead of Cooper Cup. And I'm not telling anybody that's crazy, you're off course. Here's a thing that's happening now, and this might not have anything to do with Matthew Stafford. We could talk about this as a separate. There's uncertainty in the Rams offense. Is Cam Akers really the lead back? Is this more of a committee? But all this stuff intersects at Matthew Stafford, because if John Walford is the quarterback, or if Matthew Stafford's the quarterback and gritting his teeth like Ben Roethlisberger was when his elbow wasn't really the same, it's not the same Rams offense. Since you were the first one to put this on my radar and allowed me to put it on a lot of other people's radar before it was on the NFL's radar, how does the Matthew Stafford elbow figure into Allen Robinson as a proposition that you can take in the fourth round, and just projecting the Rams offense this year?
Yeah, and obviously I'll give credit where credit is due. When I first brought it up, I mentioned Ross Tucker because I heard it on Ross Tucker, former colleague get a chance to work with for a couple of years, and on his show. But I'll say that the more that they have it on a schedule, and the more that I hear that he's doing fine, and I'm not hearing any counter arguments from people at camp. The more I'm assured that it's probably going to be fine. There's a chance it could be more aggravated with contact, but how do we know whether it was contact that would have aggravated an injury that didn't exist in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And Matthew Stafford's played with so many crazy injuries, or dealt with so many crazy injuries. He's kind of like the junior Steve McNair of this generation as a quarterback. So if there's a guy that I would say, he tore 2 ligaments in his knee, and he's got a back injury, and he has a bruised sternum, but he's going to suit up today and give you 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. If there was a player I would bank on to do that in the NFL today, it would be Matthew Stafford. So I'm a little less worried. I've been a little more optimistic. At first I projected 50%, out of the gate. And now I'm at the point where I think I have him at 14 games, which is still, I still feel pretty, and I'd say that that's even a conservative projection. So with Robinson, I just look at it this way. The thing that I think a lot of people miss out every year in fantasy, especially either newbies or people who just get worried about this type of thing and don't think about it, is that every year when you look at the top offenses support multiple fantasy players. So when you look at Cooper Kupp and say, oh, well, he had 1,948 yards and 16 touchdowns. Well, even if he was the number one by 97 points, I think, last year over Deebo Samuel. I mean, even if Robert Woods stayed healthy, who was on a low-end wide receiver 1 fantasy points per game track before he got hurt, if he stayed healthy, I bet Cooper Kupp still would have been the number 1 receiver, even if he didn't have it by such a large margin, and even if he's a top 3 guy. So that means this offense can support multiple top players. And Allen Robinson, I mean, listen, he still looked good. He has not had an NFL caliber starting quarterback ever.
Right.
I mean, all apologies to Mitchell Trubisky. Maybe he pulls out this, the win here in Pittsburgh and starts to play well. Certainly, you look at Blake Bortles, and he had that off the chain second season where he actually, our buddy Eric Stoner said he studied and he actually worked hard, and that he wasn't at least according to his rumor mill, Blake Bortles wasn't at the at the pool hall. Let's just put it that way. The pool hall section of the dance club where you give money to certain people on a regular basis. So he, he was actually behaving himself and maybe actually on the surface of learning what a cover 2 looked like when he was hitting up Robinson for a career year. I think Robinson could have that kind of production. He's a terrific route runner. He's good after the catch. He may not be Robert Woods after the catch, but he's not far away from that. And he's a better guy with the ball in the air in addition to that. So Cooper Kupp, who's so versatile, opens up a lot for Allen Robinson in that regard. And then you stretch the field with Tutu Atwell. Even if you're not a huge fan of what he's going to do in fantasy, he's going to serve a purpose in this offense. So Allen Robinson to me is on par, like almost even with Courtland Sutton in this draft for me. Like if you can get Allen Robinson, Courtland Sutton, and I'm going to say the guy I'm gambling on this year, and I don't even think it's that much of a gamble. It's just that the hamstring has people scared now after he started off strong. It's Michael Thomas. I'm ready for the Michael Thomas vengeance tour. And it's not like he has vengeance because people are writing him off. I just think he's an intense dude who really loves football and loves the game. And all I needed to see is last week's practice before the hamstring injury. That's enough. I would be surprised if they fake the hamstring injury just so that they can let him sit down and rest and be ready for it. And if he doesn't, and I fail because I picked him somewhere in the 4th or 5th round, and that's my one take a chance player in the first 10 rounds of the draft, I'm fine with it because either way, any of those 3 guys could have 1,500 yards and 12 to 15 touchdowns this year. Not all of them will do it. Not all 3 of them will do it. If they do, you're going to win your league. I mean, but one of them probably will. And I would bet one of them will make up for the other if the other fails as a worst case scenario. I just expect all of them to be somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 yard receivers with 8 to 12 touchdowns. And that right there is going to put you in the playoffs.
Yeah, I like the touching on the idea of building in upside to your roster. And I just did a tweet yesterday on DeAndre Hopkins. I think DeAndre Hopkins qualifies too as a way to build in upside to your roster. And especially Michael Thomas is a wonderful example. Michael Thomas is a player. The fun thing about Michael Thomas is 3 or 4 weeks into the season, Matt, people are either going to feel really smart or really stupid for taking him. Yeah. And there's not going to be any in between.
Yeah. And I'm okay with looking stupid with that because it's just like, whatever you know, the thing about building a good draft plan, I think, is I'm a big believer that yes, you can win your league with late round picks, but you don't lose your league with early round picks.
Right.
And so that's why when people are like, well, you've got Nick Chubb at this point in the draft and or you've got this guy rated somewhere, 12th instead of 14th or 15th over 8. Listen, at that point, you're in the target range of an early round player. When you're drafting players in the first 3 to 4 rounds, you're thinking, if things go right, he could be an elite player. That's the mindset everyone has. So why are you freaking out over the minutia of these things? Because it's not about trying to hit the bullseye. It's just about hitting the target at this point. Yeah. You don't take Tony Pollard in the 4th round and go, he's going to overtake Ezekiel Elliott. And I'm banking on that. You take him in the 7th or 8th round. If you're, to me, in my opinion, if you can get him there, because he's not the number 1 guy and you're not trying to predict that right there. It's one thing to go, Parris Campbell could be a junior Keenan Allen, or Sammy Watkins could actually have his 5th season where he actually plays at least 13 games, which would give him an 80% chance of being a starter based on his track record in fantasy if he can stay healthy. Well, you're not taking those guys as 5th round bets. You're taking them as post 13th round bets. Right. And that's fine. But why do that? You don't want to play that game in the first 8 to 10 rounds of your draft. And I think if you do, you only do it with maybe 1, maybe 2 players. If you do it with 1 player, fine. And to me, Michael Thomas is that kind of player.
Yeah, someone brought up Chris Godwin. That's another one. I mean,
Yeah.
we all may have different ideas, but the point is when you project the best case scenario for a player, there's got to be at least a couple of players in your early draft that could just destroy expectations. And one of the things, and I'd like how you bring up things I want to step through and touch on because there's so much wisdom here. First of all, I want to go back to what you said about these good offenses can make many players overachievers. If the offense overachieves, the players overachieve. And I think one of the things that we get hung up on, and I'm sure I could catch myself doing it at times too, is there's only one football, there's only one ball, and all these mouths to feed. But if the bowl's big and the spoon's big, you can feed all the mouths, and maybe even it is not everyone gets fed every week. But if we're talking about Dallas Goedert, he doesn't need to even get fed every week. If he gets fed half of the weeks, you're going to be happy that you're starting him every week where you got him in your draft. Tampa Bay's offense had 3 top 13 fantasy receivers on a points per game basis last year. So if you're saying, oh, I'm out on Russell Gage, or I'm even softened on Julio Jones. Sure, Julio Jones too. Why not? The point is when you see, and now granted, Tampa's has offensive line issues. And one of the things one of the notes I'm hitting again and again and again these days, Matt, and I just did a debate show with Evan Silva on Establish the Run, which was really fun, which is, I think we need more of that kind of content in the fantasy football space.
We just got to get rid of the heels who want to be a heel with that and turn it into like a real debate. If you take it into a real debate rather than a rhetoric debate, then you're good.
Rocky and Apollo when they're sparring, baby, respect. Vigorous battle, me and Mike Clay back in the day. Those were the best, the sword and shield. I like to say death, taxes, and Mike Clay. That's one of my sayings. But the thing about debating, especially your strongest held positions, which is like, who do you not want to leave your draft without, right? Is that you need to be familiar with the other side. So if there are signs that you were wrong, you'll be ready to react. Yeah. I've been using the metaphor, Matt, of the offensive lineman who blows the block but is there to recover the fumble. That they're usually tuned in to that fumble when the quarterback gets hit because they're the one that turned around like, oh no. And I think that's something we can do with all of our strongest held positions, because we're always talking about 60-40 or 70-30 at most propositions here. There's always a pretty healthy side on the other side that says, well, maybe not. Maybe,
of course.
So if you're not familiar, if you're just dismissing it, well, that's not going to happen. Then you're not going to be ready to react. And fantasy football, especially once we get in the season, is about reacting before you get so much evidence of something that now you feel safe acting on it.
And take a lesson from people who play in a lot of leagues, because most of you are listening do play in multiple leagues. If you play in multiple leagues and you're going one position with every draft that you're in, then you're not really honoring that potential argument.
Yeah.
The best fantasy players that I know are player. I think of Dwayne McFarland right off the bat. I think, Dwayne is someone who does a great job of saying, okay, well, I believe in this argument, but I'm going to have a number of teams who have the counter argument, because at some point, especially if you're playing to win money, because at that point, all the best players we talk about who are playing out to win money in high stakes leagues or DFS or multiple leagues of that nature, they'll bet the counter position in enough leagues that if it works out, that they kind of cover their nut in that way. And so I think it's a worthwhile exercise to do. Now, if you just play in one league, then, listen, just go strong to the hole. Make sure you feel good about the argument that you have by honoring that counter argument, and thinking about it, but seeing whether you feel good enough about your original argument to stay with it. If not, then, you switch to that.
And again, I want to bring up the point. Matt Harmon will quote me sometimes when I said this. You can be right and wrong in the same season. You can describe it exactly correctly. This player is going to explode because of this, and then the counter argument is, well, this player could be held back by this, and Cecil talks about windows, and you have to be flexible. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think of DeAndre Swift. I feel like I got DeAndre Swift exactly right as a player, and Jamal Williams exactly right as a player, but the situation, the game scripts were exactly wrong and wrong for Jamal Williams to get what he needed to get to be more productive than than Swift. Swift got the perfect game scripts. So, there are so many factors. You can get the player right and the situation wrong, and that's just the way that goes. This is one of those hobbies, that you just have to, you're playing odds with so many different things. But I mean, when you talk about, miles to feed, I mean, think about it. We talked about the Rams. We already talked about the fact that Kupp and Woods, without injury, would have been co-wide receiver ones. You could have said the same thing about
Kupp and Beckham.
You could have said there were, Tampa Bay, Antonio Brown was on his way, and that could have been 3. And Tom Brady was literally just like 147 yards from breaking Peyton Manning's yardage record.
Right. And that includes Gronk too. You had 3 top 13 wide receivers and Gronk, who was dominant for part of the year fantasy tight end.
Yeah. And then when you look, and we can go even further down that rabbit hole, there were more teams like that. If T. Higgins didn't miss time, you would have had Jamar Chase and T. Higgins probably as at least a wide receiver 1 and a high end wide receiver 2. The Chargers, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, I think, were co-wide receiver 1s in that offense.
Right.
And in 16-team league, if you were in a 16-team league, there were 5 teams last year that would have qualified as co-wide receiver 1 situations, not even looking at the tight end or the back. 5 teams. So that's, just keep that in mind, when the too many miles to feed thing comes up. Just, all I know is that we hear lots of stories about NFL players who came from situations with a lot of mouths to feed, and they all seem to get fed. It wasn't easy, but but the good ones do it. So these quarterbacks are some good mamas. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone gets fed. And I just off the top of my head, Matt, some of the offenses I think that could be offenses that transcend the too many mouths to feed argument: Philadelphia, San Francisco, and you brought up Detroit. And I do think an excellent starting point, I've been hitting this for years, an excellent starting point for your draft prep is who are the offenses I like, and maybe not just offenses that you like, but offenses you like to be a lot better than last year, or a lot better than what the baseline expectations are of the fantasy hive mind. Because I think Detroit is one that it's kind of a sleeping giant offense with the offensive line they have. It's one of the offensive lines that has total continuity from last year. I think you have a bold coaching staff. I think Dan Campbell, I love that Dan Campbell said someone sent me, maybe it was my man Ray, I think. I don't remember who sent me this. That Dan Campbell, someone said Dan Sun Tzu Campbell. He said, if you think I'm dumb, that's great. I want everyone to think I'm dumb. That's great for us, So I think thinking about things in terms of offenses, and that also comes into Allen Robinson, because again, how much does quarterback play, coaching, offensive line play affect the value of a wide receiver? With Allen Robinson, he's never had those things on his side. He certainly never had all 3 of those things on his side.
Yeah. Look at the Colts as an example. Top offensive line, Matt Ryan. You know how much I've had to watch him over the years. So
even if you said had to,
because I mean, I'm not an Atlanta Falcons fan. I live in Atlanta, but I'm not a Falcons fan. And I like Matt Ryan, but I had to watch him. That was my job for Footballguys, was to watch him every week for pretty much from his rookie year until 2 years ago. And I still watch most of the Falcons games. Matt Ryan's still a good quarterback.
Yeah.
And Matt Ryan's a better quarterback than Carson Wentz, if you ask me. And Carson Wentz had a pretty darn good season last year because he had the comfort of a good offensive line and some quality players. It's only going to get better. And he's a good example of a guy with a perfect match in what he does well with Parris Campbell.
Yeah.
I think Parris Campbell, I mean, he's probably more of a Justin.
Healthy.
Yeah, if he stays healthy. Now, here's the thing. Is he Will Fuller? I was looking at this yesterday, and Will Fuller had more injuries to one body part than what Campbell had. And Campbell played 36 games in his 3 years at Ohio State and returned punts, a lot of punts. So it's not like this guy was brittle in college, but neither was Will Fuller. Will Fuller played 2 full years before all this stuff happened to him. But I'm willing to give Parris Campbell one more chance before I go into the hypochondriac mode of, that fantasy owners get or fantasy GMs get about certain players who have injury histories. But he's been, I think that he could be somewhere between Russell Gage and Calvin Ridley in terms of production, which means you're looking at somewhere between, at worst, 700 yards and 4 to 5 touchdowns, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 65 catches, to upwards of junior Keenan Allen, like 90 catches, 1,100 yards, 7 to 8 touchdowns. And at that rate, I think that's good. And you look at the surrounding talent of that offense, and I think that's a team that what I would also look at with a strong offensive line. But I love your Detroit one as a late round players. I've always been a Reynolds fan, a Josh Reynolds fan. DJ Chark's one of those minor anomalies in draft evaluation who can't seem to catch the ball at the way that you'd like to see him do it, but he'll make tough plays doing it anyhow. TJ Hawkinson, Quintez Cephas, when he was healthy, I mean, he was the go-to guy in crunch time in difficult situations. There's some waiver wire material and late round draft material with that offense that could be a lot of fun. And I would certainly say DJ Chark is a late round guy. You could put in that list of guys you don't want to leave without.
Yes. It's easier to say that on those guys, and Parris Campbell can qualify too. And I like that you brought up Calvin Ridley in the Parris Campbell conversation, because when I watch Parris Campbell, the little bit we've got to see him, that's who he reminded me of, in so much that he plays very fast, but very under control.
Yeah.
And that combination that's Elijah Moore, I think, is another good example of that kind of player that can be a technician, but also have tools, gifts, traits that give them even an extra advantage over that.
Let's go. Can we go back to like the dead zone of like rounds 5 to 7 and talk about some players who we think we can't leave without? Because I've got one that I just think you can't leave without somewhere between rounds 5 and 7, and to me that's Hunter Renfrow. Speaking of teams that I think are going to just explode this year, and I know that the offensive line is shaky, but it was shaky last year, and Derek Carr had a career year with a shaky offensive line and a bunch of zombies at receiver that wound up elsewhere other than Hunter Renfrow. And people just don't think Hunter Renfrow's a thing, but listen, Adam Harstead was probably the first one to really talk about Hunter Renfrow's statistical profile. And when you look at Hunter Renfrow as a route runner, he's Wes Welker. And he's getting, and Mark Schofield and Dwayne McFarland did a study at my site 2 years ago about Derek Carr. They looked at him from a data and a film standpoint, and they came to the conclusion that Derek Carr would be a best fit in an offense where the coach gives him schemes that allows him to get as much information as possible pre-snap, and that he would excel in that in the play action game, and that the ideal coach for him would be Josh McDaniels. That's what they said at my site on that thing about it. And here he is with Josh McDaniels. They get Devontae Adams, which is a massive upgrade. Hopefully Waller can stay healthy. And then you add to that the multiple nature of what this offense could be. I would even keep an eye out. The number one guy on my waiver wire, and I know we're talking about a tight end, but one of the number one guys on my waiver wire is Foster Moreau, because I think if they do start doing 2 tight ends, because I mean they're talking about Matt Collins being the opposite guy of Devontae Adams in that offense. When you're talking about Matt Collins or Keelan Cole, and Matt Collins is winning that, and they're really pleased with Matt Collins, you know what that tells me? Foster Moreau is the guy I'd be keeping an eye on, because he should be. If Foster Moreau were in Dallas right now, he would be a top 3 tight end.
I agree. And he's better than Dalton Schultz as a receiver for sure.
Yeah, without a doubt. And so if he were in Cleveland, he'd be a top 3 tight end. And people are excited about David Njoku, I guess. But Hunter Renfrow, to me, listen, great route runner. He's going to be either that Wes Welker or Julian Edelman in this offense. And why wouldn't you, if Derek Carr can throw for 4,800 yards with Zay Jones, lost Henry Ruggs to the unfortunate accident that Ruggs had that's going to put him in jail for a long time, and then Brian Edwards, all these guys that are gone, and then you had Waller for part of the season, and you didn't have a true number 1 wide receiver who could beat any cornerback on any given play wherever you line him up one-on-one, and Carr still did that with a bad offensive line. and a zombie coaching staff, I would say, in the sense of because, of all the things that went down. Listen, I mean, I'm not a huge Derek Carr fan, but what he does well, and he's improved every year. Tom Brady in his best year before he left the New England Patriots was in, I think, 2017, where I think he had about 4,800 yards and he was like still within the top 10 of fantasy quarterbacks. And he had Brandon Cooks, Danny Amendola, and I'm trying to think of the other slot guy. It wasn't Edelman. It was like another slot guy. I wrote about it yesterday in my bold predictions piece, but he didn't have receivers he had Gronk still, but when you look at the whole, they weren't on the same plane as what the Raiders have right now.
Yeah.
And maybe Derek Carr doesn't elevate this offense the way Brady can, but I think if he already had 48, if he already had the same amount of yards as Brady with a worse situation last year, and he's in an ideal situation this year, to me, I'm all in on the Raiders. I've been all in on them for about 8 to 12 weeks now, just after looking at them. And Renfrow, to me, is a guy you can't leave without, especially in PPR leagues.
I'm totally with you on making that case for Hunter Renfrow, and then I want to get a little more into it. But and we're being overly simplistic, but Matt, I think when we look back, it's the simplistic. I like to say the universe's secrets aren't even secret. They're just right there. You just have to be looking for them. And then the name Wes Welker hovers over this, right? And even if you want to play the negative side and say offensive line, and the offensive line could be a problem. Yeah. The offensive line was a problem last year, and it has to improve, and we shouldn't just pencil in improvement. But who's going to be the player coming open early on route? Yeah. Who's going to be, if they have to paper over a poor offensive line, who's going to be the chain mover? I mean, it's not outlandish that at the very top end range of outcomes for Hunter Renfrow, it's like 120 catches. That's not outlandish at all, especially because, as you said, the game you play to take advantage of what Hunter Renfrow can do takes advantage of what Derek Carr can do. Look, they just paid him, $16 million a year on the extension. So that shows you how they value him. And that's the new regime, Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels. That's how they value him. Okay. And I think you're going to see alignment between Ziegler and McDaniels. I don't think this is going to be one of those situations where the GM does something that the coach is not, like Mike Gesicki franchise tag. Who knows what's going to happen there? But yeah, absolutely. And another simple way I can put the Hunter Renfrow case is it's a big three for the Raiders, but one's going in the first round. One's going, we'll see about Waller with his hold-in/hamstring issue. And then there's Hunter Renfrow in the 7th round. It's a big three, though.
Yeah.
A couple of things I want to go back and touch on that I have notes just to make a note. You mentioned Higgins versus Chase, and I hesitate to throw this out there because you can play this game and go back another week. But going into week 17, Higgins and Chase were almost identical in points per game. And then Chase had like 3 touchdowns and 200 whatever yards. Now Higgins had a 190 and 2 touchdown weekly before that, and there was some separation, maybe a couple of points a game before Higgins' big game. But I looked at it last year, Matt, and I want to say it's within the vicinity of Higgins outscored Chase as often as Chase outscored Higgins. Chase had a few more massive blow-up games, but Higgins had some too. The ADP gap of a mid-first rounder versus a late second, early third rounder is big. Like in auction terms, that's going to be like 15% of your cap. Chase is a 25%, 28% player, and Higgins is like a 12% player. And there's nothing that we saw last year that indicates the gap should be that big. Now, Chase could be like Justin Jefferson and take another step forward, but so can Higgins. Higgins can also get better. So I think the Higgins versus Chase question is a good one. You mentioned Indianapolis as an offense to be excited about and an offense to create overachievers. Again, as soon as you hear everybody around the team from the spring saying, wow, this looks like an NFL offense. This is why I don't like any Washington players either, by the way. Is it Brian Robinson or Antonio Gibson? I don't care. I'm not taking them, right?
Yeah. Well, Terry McLaurin is kind of like the cockroach of the NFL. And I mean that as a compliment. He'll survive the nuclear holocaust that's Carson Wentz. So
I mean, but at the same time, in the same part of your draft, Matt,
you're not going to take him there.
You're not going to take him. I mean, look, I'm going to look at this is like underdog ADP. Al Robinson's going right after Terry McLaurin. I mean, before Terry McLaurin. No, I went Al Robinson. You know, they're not even close in my book. After just looking after him, I would probably take Gabriel Davis over Terry McLaurin. I would take. I'll tell you another one of my guys from that dead zone. I love Darnell Mooney. I love Darnell Mooney this year.
He's a good player.
Darnell Mooney had 1,000 yards in whatever that was last year, and whatever it is going to be this year is going to be better than that.
Yeah.
And Darnell Mooney, from every report, is just focused, possessed to be the best player that he can be.
Yeah, he's a Michael Thomas attitude player.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing you want. And can I go back on, I think it's a good point to bring up Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, because as players, if you're going to me, this is like Jimmy Smith, Keenan McCardell back in their day. And the thing is that from a draft perspective, if you're playing in certain types of leagues where you're, auction leagues or leagues where you're creating a certain draft plan and you value certain positions, T. Higgins might be the better deal. Now, as a player, I'm taking Jamar Chase all day long, just pure player. And if build doesn't matter, if there's not a build factor in it, I'm still taking Chase because he is the more versatile player, which means there's more opportunities for him to go off. Whereas I think that Higgins is a good player, but he's more of a Mike Williams player. Mm-hmm. Whereas Jamar Chase is more, if you took Keenan Allen and fused them with Justin Jefferson and then added a little bit of Randy Moss to that equation, and that you've got Jamar Chase. Because to me, Jamar Chase is the best receiver to come out since Randy Moss. And so I'm a big believer in his abilities. And I like the joke that he had this summer too, where he said, listen, me and Justin Jefferson are buddies, but Justin Jefferson just got to the NFL a year earlier than me and stole everything that he learned from me at LSU. And I believe that. It's the same kind of bravado that like Jamal Charles had when he came to Texas and said, I'm going to make everyone forget about at the Longhorn Nation, forget about that they didn't get Adrian Peterson. Well, it didn't quite happen. But I think his career bared out well, when you hear that, you don't laugh at it when he said it. You go, respect, dude. You showed people that you were a hell of a player. Yeah.
And all I'm thinking, because I got New Orleans on the brain, is just remember the gritty started in New Orleans. Alan Davis. It used to be back in the day, it was like what dance swept the nation. Now it's what touchdown dance sweeps the nation. And it's the gritty, and it's New Orleans, and it's Louisiana football. Shout out to Louisiana football.
And it's Olave is going to be doing a lot of gritties this
year. Well, and I think the Saints are another good example of another offense with offensive line continuity. And I'm not worried about Sean Payton. Just really quick, and I really think this can be a one-word answer, Matt. Are we worried about Sean Payton and Brian Dable leaving New Orleans and Buffalo?
Not enough.
Yeah, it shouldn't materially move the players in your rankings.
Jameis Winston's a player I have on my list of my QB2. He's my QB2.
Yeah, in your super flex league, just wait for him. Yeah.
He's my QB2, and in super flex, he's my QB. He's sometimes if I'm going high risk, he's my QB1 in one QB leagues in a high risk format. Because I was as down on Jameis for years as anyone with some of the things that he did behavioral wise on film. His feet always seemed to be like 2 steps behind his brain in terms of how he moved. You could just see that he was always off balance. Mm-hmm. He always seemed to be, a lot of his bad plays came because his feet weren't in a position to what his brain was seeing. Like, he's very smart, football smart, and he's very good at that. He's a student of the game, but his feet lagged behind what he was doing. So he'd often be off balance when he made some of these throws, and he was rushing to try and get to something that his body couldn't keep up with. And before the knee injury, watching him was a revelation last year. It didn't show up. It didn't show up all the time on the stat.
What was efficiency? It wasn't cumulative stats, Matt. But it was his efficiency. His efficiency went off the charts last year.
Yeah, and literally it was like his receivers were folks who just named Bloom's new favorite restaurant in New Orleans, and that they ate there, or maybe they were at like Dookie. What is it, Dookie Chase's?
Yeah,
Dookie those receivers had played like they had eaten at Dookie Chase's like 3 days in a row. Because they just couldn't get open, and
they shouldn't have been those receivers. I mean,
they should have been.
Marcus Callaway and Deontay Hardy and Traquan Smith are the 4, 5, and 6. As they should be.
Yeah, they never will be mistaken for Jarvis Landry, Michael Thomas, and Chris Olave. Never.
Yeah.
You're adding those 3 to Jameis Winston. That's like adding like aspiring Michael Evans, Chris Godwin, and you can throw in whatever favorite third guy that they've had during that time. You're gonna get an upgrade here. So, like, to me, if I leave with Derek Carr and Jameis Winston as like my quarterbacks,
you're fine.
I'm more than fine. Yeah,
you're fine. You're fine. And I think in those super flex leagues, and when we mentioned Detroit, Jared Goff is in this conversation too, as guys who you want to wait, you want to take the tank to E at quarterback. There are still options, and I know people like Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence, and there's plenty of options. Another thing I want to just touch on really quickly that you brought up earlier, that you have always been very consistent about, this is don't let ADP sway you. Yeah. You should know ADP because it helps you maximize taking players in the right round to, you spend your wallet the best, most efficient way, but you shouldn't be persuaded by, well, ADP says to take this player and I want to take them around earlier. A player that I think this applies to right now is AJ Dillon. He's one of my don't leave your draft without guys. He was going in the 5th or 6th round. I was often taking him in the 5th round. A couple of drafts I got him in the 6th round. That doesn't mean that it's bad if you need to take him in the 4th round or maybe even the 3rd round, because there was already all that give built in. ADP just familiarizes you with what everyone else thinks, but don't assume that they're right. Another optimistic offense I want to make sure I mention, and we've touched on it a few times, is Minnesota. That's another offense. There's so much. If you take Dalvin Cook, I forget who it was in my mentions that said, hey, there's a case to take Dalvin Cook number 3 overall. I think absolutely there is. A lot of people don't realize, I didn't even really let this sink in, Matt. Dalvin Cook in 2020 had more points per game than Jonathan Taylor last year.
Yeah.
He's good.
He's a fantastic player. He's a player that I'm probably too low on, and I've been saying that, but I'm just sticking with it. But I understand the outcome there. And listen, I go way back. I remember when I first came to Footballguys and our first staff league, and Gene Bramlett and I were literally outbidding each other for Ray Rice in every league that we were in. And I think I went as high as 2nd round for him, and that was his breakout year, and he was worth it. Now, of course, you need to have a good build with incorporating that. You can't go crazy, and that worked out for me. But it's one of those situations that, a guy like AJ Dillon, who when even the team comes out and says, we have 2 co-starters.
Yes, they're telling they're telling us.
We think we have 2 of the best. This is a Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb situation.
Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram.
This isn't the faux Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard, analytics fueled, obtuse argument to justify that they don't like Ezekiel Elliott's contract and they're skipping over Ezekiel Elliott's talent. Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, I understand the contract point, but sometimes you just take that argument too far to be cute. Click on me. This isn't one of those situations. This is, AJ Dillon, what he proved to people that I think people didn't understand about his game was how good of a receiver he is.
Yeah, and you were saying that before he even entered the NFL. I mean, I wish I could pull up the clip of you on the show saying, don't believe that AJ Dillon can't catch the ball because he hasn't been asked to do it.
Because we've had that with Jonathan Taylor. We had it with Melvin Gordon. We've had it with Chubb. We had it with Leonard Fournette, who had a ton of receptions last year by default because no one else could catch the ball, even though they were looking for somebody to do that. But AJ Dillon is a monster of a player if he gets the opportunities, and it looks like that's going to happen. So, I mean, that's a guy right there. I'll give you another guy that if I'm going to take a chance on this year as a running back who can catch the ball, and if I'm not getting Michael Thomas, or if I get him and I'm just feeling plucky and I feel like I'm going to take another chance, James Cook. James Cook for me, I know that it's kind of a hype thing, but I'm not a Gabriel Davis believer. I'm okay with him being maybe a wide receiver 3. I'm okay with that. I'm not a believer in the other things. I've watched enough of the tape to know that he's had some awful games with a lot of targets, and it's about the quality of targets that he gets. I think the quality of targets he gets will sustain him as a wide receiver 3. I don't think the quality of player will make him a top guy. If I were banking long-term on the Buffalo Bills offense, and I'm not saying this year, Gabriel Davis is fine. Dynasty, I think he's a sell high. I would rather buy low on Khalil Shakur, a Steelers receiver through and through who wound up in Buffalo, and Cook, who I think is a perfect fit for that offense and is going to show enough in the run game that maybe he won't be a, I think people are going to look at James Cook and they're going to go, oh, I thought he was Tony Pollard,
right?
Duke like
Johnson.
They're going to look in the people who've been looking in that window and saying, I want that. I want to get a share of that Tony Pollard, that Duke Johnson, and then they get served and it's going to have Greg Cook's jersey on the plate, and they're going to go, I didn't order this. And then they're going to say, well, just try it because I know what you wanted. You just didn't ask for the right thing. It's like you go to that bakery where where it's like run by the Italian mother. And she's like, no, you don't want this. You want this. Just listen to me,
Yeah.
and you do because mom knows best,
Yeah. Nona knows best. This is exciting. This is stimulating. I hope we all are stimulated by everything that's going on as we're getting close to real draft season. I want to touch on some different players coming up in the chat room too. And I think that James Cook, look, I'm not going to talk anybody out taking James Cook because the fact that the Buffalo running backs are going as late as they are, whether it's Singletary, they could all be right answers at different times in the season, right? Zach Moss, you can tell there's a redemption story going on there. That his ankle was affecting him all of last year. They still seem to be open to him being good. Devin Singletary, we already know, can be for fantasy good when they give him the opportunity. He's the most reliable and proven back in that backfield. And then James Cook is talented enough to just change the whole conversation. James Cook is talented enough to just come out there in the first few weeks and do something that makes him say, well, whatever our plan was in the backfield, we have to revise it to include him. But somebody said they took Nyheim Hines over James Cook, and I want to know if it was the wrong thing. Look, Nyheim Hines is another one I think is a must draft. I really think I come away with him in every draft because I'm willing to take him in about the 10th round. But again, this is another one where they're coming out and telling us, Frank Reich's telling us in fantasy leagues, take Nyheim Hines, that there's been a mistake. They haven't used him enough, and they're going to. I think Tony Pollard might qualify in a similar fashion. Now, since I mentioned Tony Pollard, I want to mention a couple other players really quick too. Someone brought up Adam Thielen. If someone said, oh, I took Adam Thielen over Hunter Renfrow, that's fine. If whatever that Cooper Kupp bounce could also apply to Adam Thielen, it's going to apply to
He's the Cooper Kupp in that offense.
Yeah.
Probably. He and KJ
Osborne's a must draft too. I don't think there's anything wrong if you take Justin Jefferson in the first round and a Thielen in the 6th, 7th round, and Osborne in like the 13th round.
Thielen had more touchdowns the past 2 years than he did his entire career. He had the same amount of touchdowns the past 2 years than he did his entire career up to before the past 2 years. So even though he wasn't getting the yardage you'd want to see because he was banged up and different things and different usage, he's a red zone monster in that. And I like Nyheim Hines. I mean, yeah. I can understand that for sure. But to me, the guy that I would take if you can't get Nyheim Hines in that same range is Michael Carter, because everyone keeps talking about Breece Hall. Listen, I've got a video on Twitter, if you are on Twitter, that says Breece Hall's a nightmare, and it shows you this LaShawn McCoy-like run that he has. It's fantastic. But what people don't realize is that Breece Hall is a lot like Jonathan Taylor was in college, which means that he was very artful at dodging pass protection responsibilities. Okay, doesn't mean that they can't get better at it, but he was not a great pass protector, and his receiving skills were okay, but he had lapses too, and some of those lapses were just technique wise. Not to mention the assignments and the coverage reading you have to have. Michael Carter was one of the best receiving backs to come out of a class. And listen, Joe Flacco still looks better than Zach Wilson.
Yeah.
And
Mike White maybe does,
and when Zach Wilson gets back into the field, when they ramrod him back in because they have to keep the egg off their face, Michael Carter is going to be the check down magnet. He's going to be and Michael Carter can block. He may not be as big as Breece Hall, Breece Hall may have more upside 2 years from now as a blocker and a receiver. But right now, this year, Michael Carter's the guy they're going to lean on, and they're going to have game scripts. If you're looking for a DeAndre Swift-like emergence, I'm sorry, you can have Travis Etienne. I'll take Michael Carter as the risk in terms of the round value that you can get them at.
Yeah, and Rich Chimney from, I'm sorry if I'm saying his name wrong, from ESPN, covering the Jets forever, said Carter still's first up. And what's interesting is Breece Hall's like a 4th round pick and Carter's an 11th or 12th round pick. I'm going to be curious to watch how the fantasy hive mind tries to digest this, because I don't think they're going to close. I don't think the gap's going to close that much. I think the Hall folks are dug in and say, hey, first running back off the board, using all this talent, it doesn't matter. And so, and Smitty brought up in the chat room, and I think this is a good point. And I've been beating this drum. If there's one strategy takeaway I want to give folks, it's the running backs, and maybe AJ Dillon won't be in the 5th round anymore.
Right.
But so maybe we're talking now 6th round, because AJ Dillon was my guy in the 5th round. But the running backs from the 6th round to about the 11th or 12th round are so rich with potential value. Clyde Edwards-Helaire came up a few times. That's another one. Yeah. I get it. Yeah. I get it. Yeah. Clyde Edwards-Helaire 1st round. Bleh. Clyde Edwards-Helaire 3rd round. Oh, Clyde Edwards-Helaire 7th round. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That tastes pretty good. That tastes pretty good. Build into your draft plan that. And I almost want to write an article about like the proposition backs. Like there's so many backs that have, if you agree with this statement, you should take them. And I'll list like 12 of them. And I know that if for at least 2 or 3, you're going to say, I agree, though, then you can just take those 2 or 3 guys and don't worry about your running back 2 until the 7th round, 6th round, or later. Go ahead.
We have a new nickname for Clyde Edwards-Helaire this year. You know what we're going to call him? Cold fried chicken.
Hey, yeah, that's right.
You know, you may not want cold fried chicken when you go to the restaurant, but when you bring it home that next day, that next morning, maybe, you know, you're going to want some of that cold fried chicken.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially if it's gas station fried chicken from New Orleans. Okay, we've gone a little over our typical 45 minutes, but I do want to touch on this because it was the biggest story of the day, yesterday into today. What give folks your first reaction, because as we absorb this, it takes more time, but Tyron Smith. And folks, I hate to say this because I don't want to be negative, but if you were projecting the Cowboys offense with 17 games of Tyron Smith, you probably were already a little too rose-colored glasses with it. But now we know maybe we'll see him in December. This is a team, Lyle Collins, who actually hasn't been practicing much in Cincinnati, so it might not have been that crazy for them to move on from Lyle Collins. But this is a team that Smith has only played 13 games in the last 2 years. Now, one of those years, Dak Prescott was out for most of the year, so it's kind of hard to evaluate. We do have some games where Tyron Smith wasn't out there. How much, if any, does this change your recommendations to folks about any and all of the Cowboys players?
Well, I was probably the most bullish person in fantasy football on Ezekiel Elliott, because I just think that, I thought I've been alluding to it, that it's kind of slander. People have been slandering his skills just in the name of that they didn't like his contract, and didn't understand how to watch the game. But when you look at that, it's going to affect Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard, because Pollard's just not going to be able to run as well. Because a lot of the runs that he has are really schemed up plays where the line is going to create holes based on down and distance situations where they're not expecting run. Elliott's the one who has to do the dirty work with guys in the backfield and loaded boxes. So Elliott, to me, is no longer a guy that I feel like you must get in the 2nd round of drafts, because he would have been a must get for me. Based on his value, I think that he would have been a touchdown machine. Now I'm a little more like, if he can drop to the 3rd or 4th, I might still consider him. But there are other players they're in that round. He's
Courtland Sutton and Allen Robinson.
He's probably out of my draft plan, which stinks because I have some shares of Elliott this year. And I just wrote a bold predictions, and my bold predictions are always like wild anyway. And I try to tame them, but I joked like this year I did a joke one. And I said, with my luck, especially as a Browns fan, the one prediction that I made fun of and said, it's not happening, I'm just listening to see if you're paying attention, will probably be the only one that works out. Well, one of the ones that I banked on working out was that Ezekiel Elliott, would be a top 5 running back in fantasy this year as a bold prediction. That one's already going down the drain, I think. So I already thought they need to try and run. And now more than ever, This is putting that emphasis on that. And I think Jerry Jones kind of gave that away in the same way that he probably gives away crucial information unwittingly, and his staff tries to keep his mouth shut. I actually have a good story about that I can't tell here. And I'm benefited from it. I'll just put it that way. But he, he's already said we need to lean on Elliott this year more than ever, because they know with all the cover two that teams were going to play, and the way that they're missing these receivers, that they're going to need to run the ball and play different, and they have a good enough defense to try to do that. They and the Browns are kind of in a similar boat for different reasons, and I think that they were hoping that Elliott could be that guy, but now more than ever, they're going to need. I believe the guy that's replacing them is Jason Wood, mentioned today in our message board. He's a penalty machine.
Yeah.
So if they can, hopefully the penalties come on pass pro, because if they're in the run game, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. But the run game's usually easier for them to find replacement talent than it is pass. So Elliott still has some hope, but I'm not as bullish on him as I was for most of the season. So that's disappointing. Lamb is still not a bad talent. I still hold him because he's going to be that Hunter Renfrow in that offense anyway, in a lot of respects. Schultz may hold steady too, in a way that if you can get him at a value as people still continue to flee off that ship, he might still be worthwhile because they're going to have to dink and dunk.
Yeah. It's just a question of whether he has to stay in to block more because of that on passing downs.
But they have Sprinkle, and if they go two tight ends with Sprinkle more, Sprinkle can block.
And Schultz, I stutter because Schultz is like one of those guys. Like pre-injury Blake Jarwin, I thought was a much more dangerous player in the passing game. Post-injury Blake Jarwin was nowhere near pre-injury Blake Jarwin. And then I just think defenses said, well, if Dalton Schultz is going to beat us, then Dalton Schultz is going to beat us, and Dalton Schultz often beat them. But then that creates the chemistry and so on. Still in that same range of the draft, I'm taking another tight end, Ertz, Knox. All of these the 8 and 10 point letters in Scrabble, I'm just not in on Dalton Schultz because I don't believe in the talent, but sometimes the situation can create the production anyway. And I think I agree with you on CeeDee Lamb in that CeeDee Lamb still has in his range of outcomes, like again 120 catches, like you said, Hunter Renfrow. He has, if Dak Prescott really relies on him as he should, then it doesn't necessarily matter. It's still going to take some edge off of the upside, but there was plenty of surplus production.
It's more Keenan Allen, Jarvis Landry in profile, because he's that kind of flexible player. That's what made him so great, is that he can be that outside threat and go deep on your top guy, but he can also be that middle of your field slot receiver who just gets a ton of volume.
Yeah, it's always good stuff. It's an exciting time. It's an exciting time to be enjoying football, enjoying fantasy football, to be part of the Football Guys community. We love y'all. It's a great privilege and pleasure always to serve you. We have tons and tons and tons of things at Football Guys. If you're listening, going on right now, get a subscription. Remember, you can even go month to month if you want. Also sign up for our email list. If you're not on the email list, that's how you're going to get me and Cecil and Joe and all the stuff that comes up to let you know what we have at the site every day for free. I promise you it will be worth the time, the free email list and all that other stuff. But mainly just we just like hanging out and talking about everything and thinking about everything we see fly past us on the football field. Always y'all the best to hang out with because you're so very classy. We'll be seeing you again very soon.